Chapter 1. The Mirage of Genius. Think for a moment about the people you hold up as the architects of progress, the brilliant minds, the innovators, the ones who seem to see around corners that the rest of us cannot even perceive. We have been conditioned to believe that this brilliance is a singular, glowing thing, a high intelligence that functions like an all-powerful engine. We imagine that if someone possesses this rare, innate capacity, they are naturally insulated from the foolishness that plagues the average person. We assume that a high capacity for pattern recognition, rapid calculation, and factual retention is the ultimate insurance policy against bad decisions. But the reality is far more uncomfortable. When we examine the lives of some of the most lauded thinkers in history, we find a jarring disconnect. We see brilliant scientists who, despite holding the keys to understanding the fundamental building blocks of existence, fall prey to the most transparent myths. We see figures with staggering academic accolades who, when stripped of their specific professional context, prove remarkably susceptible to scams and misinformation that a child might see through. The assumption that greater mental horsepower automatically translates to wiser navigation through the complexities of life is not just flawed, it is a dangerous illusion. There is a powerful analogy here that we would do well to hold on to. Intelligence is like the engine of a car. A faster, more powerful engine can indeed get you to your destination with impressive speed, but that raw power does not guarantee safety. In fact, the faster the engine, the more catastrophic the crash can be if the driver lacks the steering, the navigation, the brakes, and the map. For many, what we call intelligence is simply the engine, a mechanism for processing information. Yet we have spent the last century obsessing over the engine's power while completely ignoring the essential equipment needed to steer it. When we focus solely on that engine, we miss the mental qualities that actually keep us on the road. We ignore the capacity to question our own assumptions, the humility to recognize the limits of our knowledge, the curiosity that keeps us grounded in reality, and the emotional awareness required to interpret the world without the distorting lens of our own ego. These are not merely nice-to-have traits. They are the fundamental components of wisdom. This misunderstanding took root long ago, when early researchers began to believe that a narrow band of academic skills, memory for facts, vocabulary, and pattern recognition, could represent the entirety of human potential. They built tests to capture this raw brain power, and soon these metrics began to define who we thought was capable and who was not. We started to sort our children, our students, and our professionals based on these scores, implicitly believing that a higher number meant a higher quality of judgment. But if you look closely at those who were once celebrated as the pinnacle of this gifted ideal, the narrative begins to unravel. Many who were hailed as the future of humanity reached midlife with a sense of quiet disappointment, realizing that while they could solve abstract puzzles with ease, they had never developed the pragmatic, lived-in wisdom required to navigate their own careers or relationships successfully. They were left with the engine, but they had never learned to drive. Correcting this vision is the first step toward reclaiming our own judgment. We must stop equating the speed of our processing with the quality of our thinking. We must stop believing that hesitation is a sign of stupidity and that a quick answer is always the mark of a superior mind. The truth is that the most dangerous errors often come from those who believe they have the clearest vision. To move forward, we must first be willing to look at our own mental machinery with fresh eyes, recognizing that the very qualities we have been taught to prize may be the ones leading us into the trap. Chapter 2. The Architect of Our Own Delusion. We often equate a high intellect with cold, calculating rationality. We imagine that someone who can solve complex differential equations, master multiple languages, or design sophisticated software architecture must naturally apply that same rigorous logic to their everyday choices, their financial investments, or their political beliefs. But this is a fundamental misunderstanding of how the human brain operates. Rationality, the ability to make optimal decisions to meet our goals and to form beliefs based on solid, objective evidence, is not the same thing as general intelligence. In fact, they are often barely speaking to each other in the corridors of the mind. To understand this disconnect, we have to look at the mechanics of our thinking. Our minds are constantly toggling between two distinct modes of operation. One is fast, intuitive, and highly emotional. It is the autopilot that helps us read a subtle shift in a friend's facial expression or jump back from a sudden loud noise. The other mode is slow, deliberate, and analytical. It is the mode we use to learn a new skill or calculate our taxes. We like to think that our slow, analytical mind is firmly in the driver's seat, carefully guiding our lives. But in reality, our fast, intuitive mind is constantly whispering in our ear, feeding us quick judgments and immediate gut feelings before our logic has even had a chance to tie its shoes. The problem arises because these gut feelings are riddled with invisible flaws. We are anchored by the first piece of information we hear. We are swayed by the emotional framing of a question, and we stubbornly refuse to let go of a failing endeavor simply because we have already invested our precious time or money into it. And here is the crucial, unsettling truth. Possessing a massive intellect does not turn off these intuitive biases. A high capacity for abstract logic offers absolutely no automatic defense against the quiet, persistent tug of a cognitive shortcut. You can possess a staggering capacity for memory and pattern recognition, yet still find your life derailed by impulsive, irrational choices. Imagine a brilliant entrepreneur who has spent a decade building a revolutionary logistics company. She is renowned for her sharp, analytical mind, her ability to forecast market trends, and her ruthless efficiency. Her professional life is a testament to objective, flawless logic. Yet, when it comes to a specific, deeply personal passion project, a new product line that the market clearly does not want, she pours her company's capital into a bottomless pit. As the product hemorrhages money and the data clearly screams for a pivot, she refuses to pull out. Instead of applying her rigorous analytical skills to cut her losses, she begins to invent incredibly complex, sophisticated reasons why the market data is flawed, why the consumers just do not understand the vision yet, and why she is ultimately right. She is suffering from a profound disconnect between her intellectual capacity and her rational judgment. She is using her massive brain power not to find the truth, but to construct an impenetrable fortress around a terrible decision. This is where the trap of intelligence becomes truly dangerous. When a highly intelligent person forms a belief, especially one tied to their identity, their ego, or their emotional security, they rarely use their intellect to objectively evaluate that belief. Instead, they weaponize their intelligence to defend it. Rather than acting like a neutral judge carefully weighing the evidence, the intelligent mind becomes a fiercely brilliant defense attorney, manipulating facts, dismissing contrary evidence, and building elaborate rationalizations to protect the ego. The smarter you are, the more skilled you become at this elaborate self-deception. Think about the endless bitter debates over divisive social or political issues. You will often find highly educated, exceptionally smart people on both sides, utterly entrenched in opposing realities. If intelligence were synonymous with objective rationality, greater intellect would inevitably lead people to converge on a single, evidence-based truth. But that is rarely what happens. Instead, the most educated individuals are often the most polarized. They use their vast vocabularies and their deep capacity for research simply to gather heavier ammunition for the side they already chose, based on a raw, emotional instinct. They dig a deep moat around their castle of beliefs, and they use their intelligence to shoot flaming arrows at anyone who dares to approach with a conflicting fact. This phenomenon is compounded by a psychological quirk that blinds us to our own flaws. We are all generally quite good at spotting the logical fallacies and emotional biases in someone else's thinking. We can watch a colleague make a foolish choice and dissect exactly where they went wrong. But when we turn the lens inward, the image blurs. Tragically, individuals with higher cognitive abilities often suffer from an even larger blind spot. Because they have spent their lives succeeding academically, and because they are accustomed to being the smartest person in the room, they implicitly trust their own minds. They believe that because they are undeniably smart, their intuitions must also be infallible. They simply cannot conceive that they could be fooling themselves. This creates a devastating cycle. The intelligent mind feels a gut instinct, an emotional pull toward a specific belief or a critical decision. Because of their profound self-trust, the person accepts that instinct completely. Then, the massive engine of their intellect whirs to life, generating articulate, highly sophisticated justifications for why that gut feeling is actually a profound, objective truth. They weave a narrative so intricate and convincing that it becomes impossible for anyone, especially themselves, to penetrate. They have effectively used their genius to outsmart themselves. We see this play out not just in personal beliefs, but in the highest echelons of professional life, leading us to an even more unsettling realization. What happens when this brilliant, self-deceiving mind is not just operating in isolation, but is armed with years of specialized training, acclaimed credentials, and profound authority? What happens when the architect of the delusion is an unquestioned expert? Chapter 3. The Blindness of Expertise. We place an enormous amount of faith in experience when the stakes are at their absolute highest, when we are lying on an operating table, when we are boarding a commercial airliner, or when we are trusting someone with our life savings. We actively seek out the person with the most years on the job. We want the veteran. We operate under the deeply held assumption that decades of specialized training and countless hours of practice forge an impenetrable shield against error. We believe that if intelligence is the raw power of the mind, then expertise is the finely tuned machinery that channels that power flawlessly. Yet there is a profound paradox hidden within the mastery of any skill. The very cognitive mechanisms that allow an expert to perform with breathtaking speed and efficiency are exactly the same mechanisms that create devastating blind spots. The tragic reality is that the most catastrophic professional failures rarely happen because the expert lacked knowledge. They happen precisely because the expert knew too much. To understand how this happens, imagine a seasoned emergency room physician nearing the end of a grueling 12-hour shift. The trauma bay is a symphony of chaos, but to her it is completely legible. When a new patient is wheeled through the doors, she does not stand there systematically ticking off symptoms on a mental checklist like a first-year medical student would. Instead, within seconds of looking at the patient's complexion, listening to the rhythm of their breathing, and glancing at the vital signs, she makes a diagnosis. She issues orders, and lives are saved. This almost magical intuition is the result of a process the brain uses to handle overwhelming complexity. Over decades of practice, the expert brain stops seeing individual pieces of information and starts seeing vast, interconnected patterns. Just as you do not read a book by sounding out every single letter, but rather by recognizing whole words and phrases instantly, the expert reads their environment through mental templates. They have built an internal library of thousands of scenarios, and their brain automatically matches the current situation to a familiar script. This drastically reduces the mental workload, allowing them to act with fluid, automatic precision. But this breathtaking efficiency demands a heavy toll. When the expert brain instantly locks onto a familiar pattern, it actively stops searching for new information. It begins to filter out anything that it deems to be irrelevant noise. And this is where the danger lies. What happens when the patient presents with symptoms that perfectly mimic a common respiratory infection, but there is one tiny, anomalous detail, a faint, atypical rash or a slightly unusual blood marker that points to something incredibly rare and deadly? The first-year student who has no mental templates is forced to look at every single piece of data sequentially. They might catch the anomaly because they have to look at the whole picture piece by piece, but the seasoned expert, relying on their highly efficient pattern recognition, might look right past it. Their brain has already snapped the puzzle pieces together and declared the image complete. They are literally blinded by their own expectations. They see what their vast experience tells them they should see, and they become entirely deaf to the subtle whispers of contradictory evidence. This cognitive rigidity is compounded by a profound psychological shift that occurs as we climb the ladder of mastery. When we are novices, we are often painfully aware of our own ignorance. But as we gain accolades, certifications, and respect, acquired arrogance can begin to settle over our judgment. We develop a sense of earned dogmatism. Because we have put in the thousands of hours, and because society has crowned us as authorities, we begin to feel that we have earned the right to be inflexible. We become less willing to entertain alternative viewpoints, especially if they come from someone we perceive as lacking our pedigree. Consider a veteran financial auditor who has spent 30 years uncovering corporate malfeasance. They know all the classic signs of fraud. But business evolves, and criminals invent entirely new, unprecedented ways to hide money. When a junior accountant nervously approaches the veteran with a strange, unfamiliar irregularity in a ledger, the expert is highly likely to dismiss it. They do not dismiss it out of malice, but because the anomaly does not fit into their vast, established mental library of how fraud operates. The expert assumes that if it were truly a threat, they would have recognized it. They conflate their deep knowledge of the past with an infallible ability to predict the future. Furthermore, experts often begin to suffer from an illusion of competence that extends far beyond their actual domain. A brilliant cardiovascular surgeon might begin to speak with absolute, unwavering authority on epidemiology or nutrition, entirely unaware that outside of the operating room, their opinions are no more valid than a layman's. Because they are a master in one highly specific arena, they assume their superior judgment blankets every subject they touch. They lose the ability to say the three most protective words in the human language. I don't know. This is the curse of knowledge. The deeper we sink into our specialized domains, the more our neural pathways become entrenched. We lose the beginner's mind, that fertile, flexible state of awareness, where all possibilities are still open and where every detail is examined with fresh curiosity. Our expertise becomes a beautifully constructed fortress. It keeps the chaos out, but it also traps us inside, staring at the same walls, entirely oblivious to the changing world beyond the gates. If raw intelligence can be hijacked by our emotional need to be right, and if years of specialized expertise can blind us to the vital nuances of reality, we are left in a precarious position. It becomes painfully clear that processing power and accumulated facts are not enough to guarantee a successful life. We need a different kind of operating system entirely. We need a way to harness the engine of our intelligence and the fuel of our experience without driving ourselves off a cliff. We need a profound shift away from the pursuit of mere cleverness and a definitive move towards something far more durable. Chapter 4. Beyond IQ, the Wisdom Toolkit. Think of a time when you were completely, undeniably certain that you were right about a deeply emotional conflict. Perhaps it was a bitter disagreement with a partner or a high-stakes standoff in a boardroom where the tension was so thick you could hardly breathe. You probably marshaled every ounce of your intellect to build an impenetrable wall of arguments. You used your brain power to dismantle your opponent's logic piece by piece. But did that brilliant display of mental horsepower actually resolve the conflict? Or did it merely entrench both sides, turning the disagreement into a war of attrition? For generations, we have assumed that the ultimate goal of the human mind is to achieve this kind of raw processing dominance. But researchers are now uncovering a completely different dimension of human cognition, one that has nothing to do with solving abstract logic puzzles and everything to do with navigating the messy, unpredictable reality of human life. This emerging field of science is not studying intelligence. It is studying something far more profound and far more elusive. It is studying the mechanics of evidence-based wisdom. Wisdom has historically been treated as a mystical quality, something bestowed upon bearded sages on mountaintops, an aura that simply accumulates with old age. But modern cognitive science has dragged wisdom out of the realm of philosophy and placed it firmly under the microscope. Scientists have discovered that wisdom is not a vague spiritual state, but a highly specific, measurable toolkit of cognitive dispositions and strategies. It includes the ability to actively seek out compromises, the capacity to recognize how a conflict might unfold from multiple different perspectives, and, most importantly, a profound sense of intellectual humility. It is the quiet, powerful recognition of the limits of your own knowledge and the acceptance of the inherent uncertainty in your own judgment. To understand how this toolkit operates in practice, consider a technique that we might call a kind of moral algebra. Imagine a young professional agonizing over a massive career leap. The standard approach is to quickly scribble down a list of pros and cons, glance at which side is longer, and go with the gut feeling. But a truly wise thinker slows this process down to a deliberate crawl. They do not just write down the obvious factors. They actively force themselves to consider the hidden variables, the reasons that are not immediately present in the mind. They weigh each factor, not just by its immediate emotional pull, but by its long-term impact. And crucially, they do not make the decision immediately. They walk away. They let the mind settle for days, waiting to see if any new contradictory information rises to the surface. This deliberate slowing down is an intentional strategy to defeat our own cognitive miserliness. It forces us to ask the most uncomfortable question a brilliant mind can face. What if I am entirely wrong? One of the most powerful ways to exercise this kind of open-minded thinking is to actively argue against your own gut instinct. If you are absolutely certain that a new project is going to fail, force yourself to spend 10 minutes writing a passionate, detailed argument for why it will succeed. Ask yourself if you would judge the exact same evidence differently if it had been presented by someone you deeply admire rather than someone you dislike. This is not a theoretical exercise. It is a vital, protective mechanism against the biases that hijack our intelligence. But here we encounter a fascinating and incredibly frustrating quirk of human nature. You have almost certainly noticed that you are exceptionally good at giving advice to your friends. When a colleague is trapped in a toxic relationship or a failing business venture, the path forward seems blindingly obvious to you. You can lay out a wise, compassionate, and perfectly logical strategy for them. Yet, when you find yourself in the exact same situation, your life falls apart. You make impulsive, terrible choices. You ignore the obvious warning signs. Psychologists have a name for this deeply human contradiction. They call it the paradox of the legendary king who was renowned across the ancient world for his brilliant, impartial judgments of other people's disputes, yet whose own personal life was a catastrophic mess of intemperate passions and terrible decisions. We are masters of wisdom when looking at the lives of others, but we are absolute fools when looking at our own. The reason for this asymmetry lies in the temperature of our thinking. When we are dealing with our own problems, our ego is threatened. We switch into a state of hot emotional processing. Our perspective becomes narrow, defensive, and fiercely self-centered. We lose the ability to see the bigger picture or to entertain alternative viewpoints. But when we look at a friend's problem, our ego is safe. We are utilizing cool processing. We are naturally distanced, which allows us to be objective, intellectually humble, and wise. The key to unlocking our own wisdom, then, is to figure out how to cool down our own minds. How do we trick our brains into treating our own crises with the same brilliant detachment we offer to strangers? The answer is a surprisingly simple, yet profoundly transformative technique known as self-distancing. When you feel the heat of a conflict rising, when your chest tightens and your brilliant mind starts preparing for war, you must forcefully change your psychological vantage point. Imagine that you are a fly on the wall, observing the room from a high corner. Watch the scene unfold as if it were a movie playing on a screen. Look at yourself sitting there and describe what is happening, but do not use the words I or me. Instead, speak to yourself in the third person. Use your own name. Say to yourself, why is he reacting this way? What is she truly afraid of in this moment? This tiny shift in language is like throwing a circuit breaker in your brain. By referring to yourself in the third person, you force your mind out of its defensive, egocentric state and into a meaning-making mode. You instantly become the impartial observer of your own life. Studies have shown that this simple act of self-distancing drastically reduces physiological signs of threat, lowers anxiety, and massively increases a person's willingness to seek compromise and understand the opposing point of view. It has been shown to rescue failing marriages and diffuse intense political arguments. Wisdom, therefore, is not an innate gift that some are born with and others lack. It is a daily, deliberate practice. It is the conscious choice to step back from the raw power of our own intelligence, to cool the heat of our own certainty, and to continually doubt our own infallibility. But as we strip away these layers of cognitive bias, we are left with a new challenge. If we are no longer letting our reactive, defensive instincts drive the car, how do we know which internal signals to trust? We must learn to tune a new kind of instrument. We must learn to read the compass of our own deepest emotions. Chapter 5. The Compass of Emotional Depth. We are often told that to make a truly smart decision, we must banish emotion completely. We treat our feelings as if they are a primitive, chaotic force threatening to derail our cold, pristine logic. Society champions the image of the Stoic thinker who relies solely on hard data and rational analysis. But what if the opposite is true? What if trying to suppress your gut instincts is actually cutting you off from one of the most powerful and sophisticated data processing systems you possess? Deep within the architecture of our minds, every experience is processed rapidly and non-consciously, triggering a cascade of physical changes in the body long before our conscious mind even realizes what is happening. It might manifest as a sudden, heavy knot in the stomach, a subtle shift in heart rate, or a faint prickle of sweat on the skin. Your brain constantly reads these physical markers, these bodily signals, to give you a visceral sense of a situation before your logic has time to catch up and articulate the reasons why. Picture a seasoned investor sitting in a sleek, glass-walled boardroom. Across the table, a charismatic founder is pitching a new technology startup. The slide deck is flawless, the financial projections are staggering, and every logical metric screams that this is a highly lucrative opportunity. Yet, as the presentation goes on, the investor feels a strange, heavy tension forming in their chest. They cannot immediately articulate exactly what is wrong, but their body is ringing an alarm bell. Over decades of high-stakes deals, this investor's non-conscious mind has learned to recognize the microscopic, almost imperceptible patterns of a bad investment, perhaps a fleeting micro-expression on the founder's face or a slight evasive hesitation in their voice. The body recognizes the danger before the intellect does. The people who consistently make the most successful, intuitive decisions are not the ones who ignore this physical tension. They are the ones who have developed an exquisite, finely tuned sensitivity to it. This sensitivity to our own internal physical state is a measurable skill, and it varies wildly from person to person. Some individuals can sit quietly and easily count their own heartbeats without ever checking their pulse, possessing a profound internal awareness, while others are entirely deaf to the rhythms of their own bodies. People with a high degree of this internal attunement tend to perform remarkably well in complex, high-pressure environments. They can feel the physiological warning signs of a bad risk long before their conscious mind can process the numbers, allowing them to navigate chaotic situations with a seemingly magical intuition. But this emotional compass is highly sensitive to magnetic interference. The danger arises when we confuse irrelevant background feelings with our intuition about the specific choice in front of us. Imagine you are interviewing a candidate for a crucial leadership position on your team. You woke up with a mild headache, the morning commute was miserable, and it is pouring cold rain outside. As you sit across from the candidate, you feel a lingering sense of gloom, fatigue, and discomfort. Because human beings are desperate, meaning-making machines, your brain immediately assumes this negative feeling is a profound gut instinct about the person sitting in front of you. You decide they lack energy and reject them, entirely unaware that you were not judging the candidate at all. You were simply judging the weather. We constantly mistake our arbitrary physical states, hunger, exhaustion, or the onset of an illness for genuine intuition. The defense against this interference is building a profoundly precise emotional vocabulary. We must move beyond crude, generalized labels like I feel bad or I am stressed. The most effective decision makers are those who can pause, look inward, and dissect a blur of negative feeling. They can accurately identify whether they are experiencing moral disgust, professional apprehension, fear of failure, or merely the physical discomfort of missing lunch By pinning a highly specific, accurate label onto a feeling, you drag it out of the shadows and into the light of conscious awareness. Once a feeling is accurately identified and distinguished from the noise, its mysterious power over your judgment evaporates. You can easily discard the irrelevant emotions and focus only on the signals that actually carry vital information. In our quest to master and regulate these emotions, researchers have uncovered a fascinating and entirely unexpected strategy: reasoning in a second language. For those who are bilingual, the mother tongue is deeply, inextricably woven with childhood memories and raw, visceral emotion. A second language, learned later in life in a classroom or a professional setting, often lacks this heavy emotional baggage. When people are forced to navigate a complex moral dilemma or a risky financial choice using a foreign language, the slight cognitive distance naturally dampens their emotional reactivity. They become significantly less vulnerable to manipulative framing and make vastly more rational, objective choices. It is a powerful reminder that sometimes stepping outside of our most comfortable mode of communication is exactly what we need to sever the cord of emotional bias and see a problem clearly. True wisdom, therefore, does not ask us to become unfeeling robots, devoid of passion or instinct. It asks us to become masterful interpreters of our own internal landscape. We must learn to calibrate our emotional compass, listening deeply to the profound, non-conscious intelligence of our bodies while maintaining the critical, analytical distance necessary to question exactly where those feelings are coming from. Chapter 6. Detecting the Falsehoods. If mastering our emotional compass protects us from our own internal biases, we must also develop a shield against the external forces designed to manipulate those very emotions. We live in an era where information flows like a relentless, roaring river, and within that current, falsehoods often travel faster, wider, and deeper than facts. You have likely experienced the strange phenomenon of receiving an urgent, terrified message from a highly educated, deeply rational friend, warning you about a sudden, hidden danger, perhaps a rumor that a common brand of household cleaner is secretly toxic, or a viral story about a government conspiracy to monitor civilian communications through streetlights. When you trace the claim back to its source, it crumbles instantly into absurdity. Yet, your brilliant friend forwarded it without a second thought. To understand why a sharp mind falls for a transparent lie, we have to understand how the brain actually evaluates truth and how easily that evaluation system can be hacked. The uncomfortable reality is that our brains do not naturally judge information based on strict logical merit. Instead, we rely heavily on a deeply flawed visceral feeling that we might call truthiness. This sensation of truth is primarily driven by two hidden factors: cognitive fluency and familiarity. Cognitive fluency simply means how easy a piece of information is for your brain to process. When a statement is written in a clean, legible font, when it uses simple language, or when it happens to rhyme, the brain processes it with effortless speed. Tragically, our minds consistently misinterpret this ease of processing as proof of accuracy. We subconsciously assume that because an idea slides smoothly into our awareness, it must be inherently correct. Imagine a local political campaign where one candidate presents a comprehensive, meticulously researched plan for economic reform, printed in dense paragraphs with complex statistical charts. The opposing candidate simply prints a catchy, rhyming slogan in bright, bold letters on millions of sleek posters. Even the most highly educated voters will feel a subconscious, magnetic pull toward the rhyming slogan. The brain effortlessly digests the clean, simple message and registers a quiet hum of satisfaction, mistaking that aesthetic pleasure for factual weight. Similarly, the addition of a completely irrelevant photograph to a dubious claim, like a picture of a random scientist attached to a fake medical warning, drastically increases the number of people who believe the warning is real. The image adds no actual evidence, but it makes the scenario easier to visualize, increasing its fluency and therefore its illusion of truth. This illusion is magnified exponentially by familiarity. The human brain is a pattern-seeking machine, and when it encounters the same piece of information multiple times, it begins to drop its defensive shields. A lie heard once might trigger skepticism, that same lie, repeated 10 times across different platforms, begins to feel like a consensus. We lose track of the original source and simply remember the comforting feeling of recognizing the claim. This is the dark art of the propagandist and the viral marketer. They know that if you flood the environment with a single, simple message, the sheer repetition will eventually wear down the critical faculties of even the most intelligent observers. This reliance on fluency and familiarity explains why our traditional methods of correcting misinformation often backfire with disastrous consequences. Imagine a community gripped by a viral rumor that the local water supply has been contaminated with lead. The town council, desperate to restore order, sends out thousands of flyers with a massive, bold headline: "The water supply is not contaminated with lead." They spend paragraphs detailing the safety protocols and the pristine test results. But months later, a survey reveals that a terrifying number of citizens still believe the water is toxic. Why did the correction fail? Because the town council accidentally reinforced the lie. By repeating the terrifying concept of water supply and lead, in the very act of debunking it, they made those words more familiar to the public. Over time, the human memory strips away the boring, complex nuances of the denial and simply holds onto the vivid, emotionally charged core of the message. The word "not" fades away, leaving only the vibrant association between water and poison. When we try to fight a falsehood by repeating it, we are inadvertently feeding the beast we are trying to starve. The truly wise approach to correcting a lie is to stubbornly refuse to repeat it, focusing entirely on promoting the clear, undeniable facts in the most easily digestible, fluent way possible. To protect ourselves from these sophisticated traps, we must cultivate a specific mental discipline known as cognitive reflection. This is the ability to deliberately hit the brakes on our own thinking. We are all born as cognitive misers. Our brains are evolutionarily designed to save energy by accepting the first plausible answer that comes to mind. Cognitive reflection is the conscious, practiced habit of suppressing that initial, highly fluent gut reaction and asking a simple, profound question: is this actually true, or does it merely feel true? Think of a seemingly simple riddle that instantly brings a confident answer to the tip of your tongue, an answer so obvious and intuitive that you barely have to think about it. The person who lacks cognitive reflection will blurt out that intuitive answer, entirely unaware that the riddle was designed as a trap. The wise thinker feels that same urgent intuitive pull, but they recognize it as a warning sign. They pause. They force their mind to step back from the seductive ease of the first answer and systematically check the underlying math of the problem. That momentary pause, that deliberate suspension of belief, is the ultimate shield against manipulation. We cannot possibly fact-check every single piece of information we encounter in the modern world. There simply are not enough hours in the day. But we can build an intellectual immune system through a process of cognitive inoculation. Just as a physical vaccine works by exposing the body to a weakened, harmless version of a virus so the immune system can learn to recognize and destroy it, we can expose our minds to the mechanics of deception so we can spot those tactics in the wild. When you learn to recognize the architecture of a lie, the specific subject matter ceases to matter. You learn to spot the use of a fake expert, a person brandishing a prestigious title in a completely unrelated field to lend authority to a fringe theory. You learn to recognize the anomaly as proof strategy, where a deceiver highlights one tiny unexplained detail to cast doubt on a massive, undeniable mountain of solid evidence. Once you understand how these sleights of hand work, they lose their power over you. You watch the magician perform the trick, but because you know how the trap door operates, you are no longer mesmerized by the illusion. Building this bullshit detection kit requires a profound commitment to intellectual vigilance. It requires us to constantly interrogate our own reactions, especially when we encounter information that perfectly aligns with our deepest fears or our most cherished beliefs. If a piece of news makes you feel a sudden, vindicating rush of anger or a comforting sense of superiority, that is the exact moment you must engage your cognitive reflection. That is the moment you must ask yourself who is making the claim, what their underlying motives might be, and whether the evidence actually supports the headline, or if your brain is simply surrendering to the warm, comfortable gravity of a familiar lie. Chapter 7. The Hunger for Understanding. We all know the ancient fable of the tortoise and the hare. It is the story of the naturally gifted runner who takes a nap, relying entirely on his innate speed, only to be overtaken by the slow, relentless plodder. In the realm of the human mind, we see this exact dynamic play out over the span of a lifetime. We watch children who are heralded as prodigies, who possess a dazzling, effortless ability to absorb information, gradually fade into obscurity. At the same time, we see those who were once deemed ordinary rise to staggering heights of mastery and innovation. What propels the intellectual tortoise past the sleeping hare? It is a powerful force that is rarely measured on any standardized exam, yet it is perhaps the single most vital component of a flourishing mind. It is the raw, insatiable hunger of curiosity. Imagine a young woman starting her career in structural engineering. She is surrounded by peers who can calculate load-bearing capacities faster than she can, individuals with minds like steel traps who ace every certification on the first try. Let us follow one of these highly gifted peers. He understands the formulas perfectly, applies them flawlessly to the blueprints, and clocks out exactly at 5 o'clock. He possesses a massive intellectual engine, but it only runs when he is explicitly told where to drive. Now look at the young woman. She struggles slightly more with the initial abstract math, but she possesses a profound, almost obsessive need to understand exactly why the materials behave the way they do. When a project is finished, she is out in the field, running her bare hands over the cured concrete. She stays late asking the seasoned foreman about the subtle environmental factors that affect the poor. She spends her weekends reading about ancient Roman aqueducts, just to see how historical arches survived millennia of tectonic shifts. Over the first year, her gifted peer might technically outperform her on paper, but over a decade, the landscape entirely changes. She begins to see deep structural connections he cannot even fathom. She innovates. She solves complex, unprecedented problems that have never been documented in a textbook because her mind is constantly probing the dark edges of the unknown. Her intellect was the foundation, but her relentless curiosity was the architect that built her mastery. Psychologists and neuroscientists have discovered that this need to know more operates almost exactly like a basic biological drive, remarkably akin to our hunger for food or our physical desires. When you are genuinely curious about a subject, your brain's dopaminergic system lights up with activity. Dopamine is the neurotransmitter of reward and desire, and when it floods your system in the pursuit of knowledge, it acts like a powerful chemical fixative for your memory. It strengthens the long-term storage of information in the hippocampus, ensuring that what you learn sticks permanently. This neurological reality explains why two people can study the exact same material for the exact same amount of time, yet the one who is genuinely fascinated will remember it effortlessly for years, while the other forgets it by the following morning. But the magic of curiosity goes even deeper than simple retention. When you are deeply engaged in something that fascinates you, you experience what scientists call a spillover effect. The dopamine does not just lock in the specific facts you are looking for, it primes your entire brain to become a hyper-absorbent sponge for everything in your environment. In this heightened state of arousal, you begin to effortlessly memorize incidental background information that you are not even consciously trying to learn. Your mind opens up, capturing the broader context, the subtle nuances, and the unexpected connections that a bored, disengaged mind would completely filter out as irrelevant noise. For this reason, modern research has identified 3 essential pillars that uphold lifelong success and intellectual growth: general intelligence, conscientiousness, and curiosity. If you remove any one of these pillars, the entire structure ultimately collapses. Intelligence gives you the raw capacity to process complexity, and conscientiousness provides the necessary discipline to show up and do the hard work. But without curiosity, the mind stagnates and hardens. Curiosity is the mechanism that protects us from the dangerous arrogance of expertise. It keeps us in the fertile, flexible state of the beginner's mind, constantly reminding us that there is always more to learn, more to explore, and more to understand about the people and the world around us. It is the ultimate antidote to the intelligence trap, because a truly curious mind is fundamentally incapable of remaining closed. This relentless hunger to understand the world does not just make us smarter, it makes us vastly more resilient, adaptable, and deeply fulfilled. But curiosity alone is a wild, untamed energy. To truly harness its power and transform that raw hunger into lasting, unshakable wisdom, we must understand how to channel it. We must look at the actual mechanics of how a brilliant mind absorbs and integrates new information, moving beyond surface-level memorization to achieve a profound, enduring mastery of any subject we choose to pursue. Chapter 8. Mastering the Art of Deep Learning. Think about the last time you decided to learn a completely new skill as an adult. Perhaps you decided to learn a foreign language, or master a complex musical instrument, or write computer code. At the outset, the excitement is intoxicating, but then almost immediately you hit a wall of profound, visceral discomfort. For someone who is accustomed to being competent, articulate, and successful in their daily life, stepping into the shoes of a beginner is emotionally agonizing. You sit there staring at the foreign vocabulary or the sheet music, feeling utterly inept as your mind refuses to grasp what seems so simple to others. For many highly intelligent people, this feeling of stupidity is so unbearable that they quietly abandon the endeavor, retreating back to the comfortable domains where they already excel. This retreat is driven by a fundamental misunderstanding of what learning actually is and what it is supposed to feel like. We have been conditioned to believe that if we are smart, learning should be seamless and fluid. We assume that if we are struggling, if we feel a deep sense of frustration, it means we lack the natural aptitude for the subject. But cognitive science tells us the exact opposite. That agonizing sensation of mental friction, that feeling of your wheels spinning in the mud, is not a sign of intellectual weakness. It is the literal neurological sensation of your brain forging new pathways. Consider how we typically try to study. We crave the illusion of fluency. If you are learning a new language, you might download an application that presents you with a series of digital flashcards. You swipe through them, matching words to pictures. It feels smooth, effortless, and deeply satisfying. Your brain effortlessly processes the clean, bright images, and you quickly score perfect marks on the daily quizzes. You feel brilliant, but then you travel to a foreign city, step into a bustling cafe, and attempt to order a simple cup of coffee. The waiter speaks rapidly. The background noise is loud, and your mind completely blanks. You cannot form a single coherent sentence. The application did not teach you the language. It merely gave you the illusion of competence by removing all the necessary friction from the learning process. To achieve profound, enduring mastery, we must abandon the pursuit of cognitive ease and actively seek out what psychologists call desirable difficulties. We must make the learning process intentionally harder. In various Eastern educational philosophies, there is a cultural concept that roughly translates to the idea of eating bitter. It is the profound acceptance that enduring grueling, uncomfortable struggle is not an unfortunate side effect of education, but the very nourishment that makes true growth possible. When we welcome the bitterness of frustration, we signal to our minds that the information is vital enough to warrant rewiring our deepest neural networks. The first way to embrace this bitterness is through the practice of productive failure. When faced with a new, complex problem, our immediate instinct is to look for the instruction manual or wait for a teacher to hand us the formula. We want the correct method laid out before us so we can avoid the embarrassment of making a mistake. But true deep learning requires the exact opposite approach. You must force yourself to wrestle with the problem entirely on your own, trying to invent a solution from scratch before you are ever shown the right way to do it. You will almost certainly fail, and you will feel foolish. But in the process of wrestling with the unknown, you create a complex mental scaffolding. When you are finally handed the correct formula, it does not just wash over you, it clicks deeply into the scaffolding you built during your struggle, remaining locked in your memory forever. The second crucial strategy involves dismantling the way we practice. Most of us default to massed practice, doing the exact same drill over and over again until it feels smooth. If you are learning to play tennis, you might stand on the baseline and hit 50 backhands in a row. By the 50th shot, you look like a professional. But again, this is a dangerous illusion of fluency. Your brain has simply fallen into a mindless rhythm, no longer actively working to evaluate the environment. To build resilient mastery, you must interleave your practice. You must hit one backhand, then a volley, then a serve, and then run for a drop shot. Interleaving feels incredibly frustrating because it strips away the comfortable rhythm of repetition. You will make far more mistakes, and you will feel as though you are regressing. But this constant, unpredictable shifting forces your brain to stay fiercely engaged. It requires you to not only execute the skill, but to constantly evaluate which specific variation of the skill is required in that exact fraction of a second. This is the difference between learning how to recite a script and learning how to improvise a beautiful conversation. Escaping the intelligence trap ultimately requires a radical shift in how we view our own struggles. The smartest minds are not the ones who glide effortlessly through every challenge, never experiencing the bitter taste of confusion. The truly wise are those who understand that confusion is the gateway to profound understanding. They do not hide from their own ignorance. They step directly into it, fully prepared to eat bitter, knowing that the greatest intellectual triumphs are always forged in the fires of productive struggle. Chapter 9. The Power of the Collective Mind. There is a deeply ingrained fantasy in the corporate and professional world, the myth of the ultimate dream team. We operate under the seductive assumption that if we simply gather the absolute brightest minds, place them in a sleek boardroom, and point them toward a complex problem, the resulting collision of genius will inevitably produce a masterpiece. We spend vast sums of money recruiting the top percentile of academic achievers and the most decorated veterans of industry, believing that assembling a critical mass of raw intelligence is the ultimate guarantee of success. Yet when we look at the historical record of elite organizations, we are frequently met with a staggering paradox. Some of the most catastrophic professional failures, catastrophic financial collapses, and spectacular engineering disasters have been orchestrated by rooms filled entirely with brilliant people. When you assemble a group of highly intelligent individuals, their individual cognitive flaws, their earned dogmatism, their motivated reasoning, and their expert blind spots do not magically cancel each other out. If the culture of the group is flawed, those individual traps actually amplify, feeding off one another until the entire collective marches confidently and brilliantly in the wrong direction. To understand how a room full of geniuses can make a spectacularly foolish decision, imagine a newly formed elite venture capital firm. The partners have been poached from the highest tiers of global finance. They possess staggering track records, impenetrable confidence, and an absolute certainty in their own market intuition. They are gathered around a mahogany table to discuss a potential investment in a charismatic founder proposing a revolutionary yet highly secretive blood testing technology. On paper, every single partner in that room possesses the analytical firepower to tear the founder's business model to shreds. But watch closely what happens as the meeting unfolds. The senior partner, a legend in the industry, leans forward and declares that this technology is the future of medicine, staking his formidable reputation on the deal. Down the table, a newly minted junior partner, a prodigy in biochemical engineering, feels a sudden, sharp twist of unease in her stomach. She looks at the data projected on the screen and realizes the chemical processes the founder is describing violate fundamental laws of thermodynamics. It cannot possibly work. But she does not speak. She looks at the senior partner's supreme confidence. She looks at the nodding heads of her brilliant colleagues. In a room entirely composed of geniuses, the most paralyzing fear is the fear of appearing ordinary, of slowing down the momentum, or of revealing that you do not get it. So the junior partner silences her internal emotional compass. She assumes that because everyone else is so incredibly smart, they must see something she is missing. She assumes the senior partner has already done the due diligence. This is the devastating architecture of collective stupidity. The silence in the room is not a consensus of brilliance. It is a contagion of social anxiety and hierarchical pressure. Because no one wishes to pierce the illusion of unanimous agreement, the group's massive collective intellect is completely hijacked. Instead of using their analytical processing power to interrogate the glaring flaws in the technology, the partners begin to use their intelligence to rationalize the senior partner's enthusiasm. They perform intricate mental gymnastics to convince themselves that the impossible is actually just highly innovative. They are, as the philosopher William James once observed, simply rearranging their prejudices while fully believing that they are engaged in deep thought. The disaster that follows is not born from a lack of intelligence. It is born from a toxic environment that actively punishes intellectual humility and suppresses dissenting voices. When an organizational culture values rapid agreement and intellectual dominance over psychological safety, it effectively blinds its own experts. How then do we build a true supergroup? How do we harness the power of the collective mind without falling into the echo chamber? The secret lies in recognizing that a successful team is not a collection of independent, high-powered processors. It is a fragile, interconnected ecosystem. The most effective groups are not necessarily the ones with the highest cumulative IQ. They are the ones that possess the highest degree of collective social sensitivity. They are teams where the culture explicitly rewards the beginner's mind and normalizes the phrase, "I do not understand." In a truly wise organization, the senior leader does not enter the room and immediately declare their position, thereby dropping an anchor that limits all subsequent thought. Instead, they actively solicit the opposing view. They purposefully assign someone the role of the skeptic, forcing the group to deliberately stress test their most cherished assumptions. They create an environment where the junior biochemical engineer feels not just permitted, but obligated to raise her hand and say, "The data on this slide does not make sense to me." Building this kind of culture requires a profound commitment to cognitive diversity. This goes far beyond assembling people with different academic degrees. It means actively pairing the visionary, intuitive risk-taker with the cautious, methodical pragmatist. It means creating a space where the fast, fluid thinker is forced to slow down and explain their leaps of logic to the deliberate, analytical evaluator. When these different cognitive styles are forced to interact with mutual respect, they act as the essential brakes and steering mechanisms for the team's intellectual engine. To escape the intelligence trap at the organizational level, we must strip away the ego of expertise. We must recognize that the absolute greatest strength of a collective mind is not its ability to rapidly agree on a brilliant solution, but its capacity to safely and rigorously dismantle a terrible one. When a team operates with genuine intellectual humility, recognizing that their collective blind spots are just as vast as their collective knowledge, they cease to be a mere collection of smart individuals. They become something far more resilient, far more adaptable, and infinitely wiser. Chapter 10. Building a Wiser Future. Think of the long journey we have taken together through the labyrinth of the human mind. We began by staring at a powerful, seductive mirage, the illusion that raw processing power, rapid calculation, and a massive vocabulary are the ultimate guarantees of a successful life. We have watched that mirage dissolve, revealing a far more complex and demanding reality. We have seen how a brilliant mind, left to its own devices, can become the architect of its own delusion, using its vast resources to build impenetrable walls of rationalization. We have seen how expertise can calcify into a rigid blindness and how the deepest intellects can be hijacked by the most transparent falsehoods. But we have also uncovered the antidote. We have dismantled the trap and laid out the tools required to steer the engine of your intelligence with grace, precision, and profound insight. Now the challenge shifts from understanding these tools to living them. Wisdom is not a certificate you earn, nor is it a final destination you reach after reading a certain number of pages. It is a living, breathing, daily practice. It is the quiet, continuous commitment to stepping back from the intoxicating rush of your own certainty and choosing the harder, slower path of curiosity, humility, and reflection. To see what this looks like in practice, imagine a highly accomplished leader at the twilight of a dominating career. For 3 decades, this individual has been the smartest person in every room they entered. They have built an empire by trusting their rapid-fire instincts and their ability to outcalculate the competition. Upon retiring from the corporate world, they decide to dedicate their immense wealth and formidable intellect to a complex systemic issue in their local community, perhaps revitalizing a struggling neighborhood or overhauling a failing educational program. They approach this new challenge exactly as they approached corporate takeovers. They sit in their office, analyze the demographic data, draw up an incredibly sophisticated, flawlessly logical master plan, and present it to the community leaders, expecting immediate applause and swift implementation. Instead, they hit a solid wall of resistance. The community pushes back, pointing out cultural nuances and historical grievances that the spreadsheets completely missed. In the past, this is exactly the moment the intelligence trap would spring shut. The leader's ego would flare. They would use their massive intellect to dismiss the community's concerns as uneducated noise. They would double down on their models, engaging in fierce, motivated reasoning to prove that their master plan was objectively correct, ultimately alienating the very people they intended to help and dooming the project to failure. But imagine this leader has cultivated the toolkit of evidence-based wisdom. When the resistance hits, they feel the familiar, hot rush of frustration in their chest. Instead of letting that physical sensation dictate their response, they pause. They use their emotional compass. They take a deep breath and apply a precise emotional vocabulary, realizing that what they are feeling is not righteous anger at the community's ignorance, but the sharp sting of a bruised ego. They are feeling the vulnerability of not having all the answers. Having identified the emotion, they apply the brakes. They use self-distancing, silently referring to themselves in the third person. Why is this leader feeling so threatened by this feedback? This simple cognitive shift cools the temperature in the room. It allows them to step out of their defensive posture and engage their intellectual humility. They realize that their corporate expertise, while vast, is a blind spot in this new environment. They put the spreadsheets away. They lean into the bitter, uncomfortable friction of being a beginner again. They sit in the back of drafty community halls and simply listen, treating the lived experiences of the residents with the same rigorous curiosity they once applied to financial markets. Over time, a new plan emerges, one that is perhaps less mathematically elegant than the original, but infinitely more resilient, pragmatic, and deeply rooted in reality. This is the ultimate triumph over the intelligence trap. It is the realization that your brilliant mind is not a weapon to defeat others, or a shield to protect your ego, but a highly sensitive instrument designed to connect you more deeply with the truth of the world. As you move forward into your own life, you will inevitably face moments of profound uncertainty, heated conflict, and complex decision-making. The temptations of the intelligence trap will always be there. The lure of the fast, effortless, fluent answer will constantly pull at you. When those moments arrive, remember that true brilliance is not about never making a mistake. It is about cultivating the self-awareness to catch your mistakes before they become catastrophes. Embrace the beautiful, uncomfortable friction of deep learning. Lean into your curiosity. When you are absolutely certain you are right, force yourself to argue the opposite perspective. When your gut screams at you to react, pause and read the emotional weather before you steer the ship. Surround yourself with people who think differently than you do, and actively reward those who have the courage to tell you when you are wrong. You possess an incredible cognitive engine capable of astonishing feats of creativity, problem-solving, and innovation. You have everything you need to navigate the complexities of this world, but it is not the raw power of that engine that will determine the quality of your life and the depth of your legacy. It is the wisdom with which you choose to drive